1. The Mirror Highway. Marcus Chun had been hauling freight across the Midwest for 17 years, and in all that time, he'd never missed a delivery deadline. His reputation as a reliable driver had earned him premium contracts with companies that needed their cargo delivered on schedule, no matter the weather or road conditions. The night of October 14, 2019, Marcus was driving his Peterbilt 579 along Interstate 80 through Nebraska, carrying a load of industrial equipment destined for a manufacturing plant in Omaha. The night was clear, the road was empty, and his GPS showed he'd arrived 2 hours early. At 7 a.m., Marcus noticed something unusual on his dashboard. The odometer had stopped moving, frozen at 186,847 miles. Even though he was maintaining a steady 70 miles per hour, he tapped the gauge, assuming it was a simple malfunction, but then noticed his fuel moved either. The needle remained fixed at 3/4 full, exactly where it had been for the past hour. He checked his phone to verify his speed, and the GPS confirmed he was traveling at the correct velocity. But something felt fundamentally wrong about the situation. The highway stretched endlessly before him, illuminated by beams cutting through the darkness. Marcus had driven this route dozens of times, and he knew there should be an exit for a truck stop within the next 5 miles. He'd planned to stop there for coffee and a quick inspection of his rig, but the exit never appeared. Mile after mile passed, yet the landscape remained identical. The same gentle curve to right, the same pattern of reflectors along the center line, the same cluster of 3 trees visible in the distance that never seemed to get any closer. Marcus grabbed his CB radio and switched to channel 19, the standard frequency for trucker communication. Breaker 19, this is Red Dragon looking for any drivers on I-80 eastbound near mile marker 340. Anybody out there? Static filled the cabin, but underneath the white noise, he heard something else. His own voice, repeating the exact same message with a 1-second delay. He released the talk button, and the echo continued for another 3 seconds before fading into silence. The unease that had been building in Marcus's chest bloomed into genuine fear. He pressed harder on the accelerator, pushing his speed to 85 miles per hour, but the scenery didn't change. The same curve, the same trees, the same reflectors passed by his windows in infinite loop. He checked his odometer again, still frozen at 186,847 miles. His fuel gauge hadn't budged, according to every instrument in his truck. He wasn't moving at all, yet the engine roared beneath him and the road blurred past his headlights. He decided to stop completely. He eased off the accelerator and pressed the brake pedal, feeling the familiar resistance and hearing the air brakes engage with their characteristic hiss. The truck slowed, and he pulled onto the shoulder, the tires crunching against gravel. He shifted into park, set the air brake, and sat in the sudden silence, his heart pounding against his ribs. Through the windshield, the highway stretched forward and backward, illuminated by his running lights, completely empty in both directions. He opened the driver's door and stepped down onto the pavement, his boots making a solid sound against the asphalt. The night air was cold against his face, carrying no scent, no diesel exhaust, no earth smell, nothing at all. The silence was absolute. No wind, no insects, no distant traffic sounds. Just pure, oppressive silence that seemed to press against his eardrums. Marcus walked around the back of his trailer, checking the cargo straps and doors out of habit. Everything appeared normal, solid, real, tangible. Then he noticed his shadow. The moon hung full and bright above him, casting his shadow across the pavement. But the shadow was moving independently. While Marcus stood perfectly still, his shadow took 3 steps forward, then turned to look back at him. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. He stepped backward, and his shadow mimicked the movement, but with a delay of several seconds, as though it were receiving instructions from somewhere far away. Marcus ran back to his cab and climbed inside, slamming the door behind him. His hands shook as he released the air brake and shifted into gear. He needed to move to escape this impossible stretch of highway. The engine responded, and he accelerated back onto the road, pushing his speed to 90 miles per hour. The white dashes of the center line blurred together into a continuous stripe, but still, the scenery didn't change. The same curve, The same trees, the same eternal loop. Hours passed, or what felt like hours. Marcus's watch had stopped at 2:47 a.m., the exact moment his odometer had frozen. He tried his cell phone again, but it showed no signal and refused to connect to any network. The GPS had locked onto his location, but showed him as stationary, despite the road rushing beneath his wheels. He was trapped in a moment, a slice of time that repeated endlessly while the rest of the world continued without him. As panic began to override his rationality, Marcus noticed something new. Ahead on the road, illuminated by his headlights, stood another truck, a Freightliner Cascadia with a refrigerated trailer. It was parked on the shoulder, emergency flashers blinking. Marcus felt a surge of hope. Another driver, someone who might be the same phenomenon, someone who could confirm he wasn't losing his mind. He began to slow down, preparing to pull over behind the other truck. As he drew closer, details became clear. The truck was old, its paint faded and streaked with rust. The license plate was from Nebraska, but the registration stickers dated back to 1997, 22 years old. The trailer doors hung open, swinging slightly despite the absence of any wind. Marcus stopped his truck 30 feet behind the Freightliner and grabbed his flashlight from the door pocket. Every instinct screamed at him to drive on, to leave this mystery unsolved. But the alternative was to continue driving in this endless loop forever. He approached the abandoned truck slowly, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The driver's door stood open, and when Marcus shined his light inside the cab, he saw the interior was covered in dust and cobwebs. The seats were rotted, the dashboard cracked and broken. This truck had been here for years, decades, perhaps, but that was impossible. He'd been driving the same stretch of highway repeatedly, and the truck had only just appeared. Marcus walked around the back of the trailer, where the open doors revealed the interior. His flashlight illuminated the cargo space, and his blood turned to ice. The trailer was filled with trucks, dozens of them, miniature replicas of semi-trucks and trailers, all arranged in neat rows. But as he looked closer, Marcus realized they weren't models or toys. They were real trucks, somehow shrunk down to impossible sizes. Each one perfectly detailed with tiny license plates, company logos, and cargo. He recognized several of the trucking companies, businesses that had gone out of operation years ago. In the center of the trailer, arranged in a special display case, was a Peterbilt 579, dark blue with red striping, Marcus's company colors. And on the tiny license plate, he could just barely make out his own registration number. The miniature truck was an exact replica of the one he was driving, down to the custom mud flaps and the small dent in the front bumper he'd gotten 3 months ago in a parking lot accident. Marcus stumbled backward, his flashlight falling from his nerveless fingers. The beam spun across the pavement, and in that rotating light he saw them, dozens of men standing in the darkness beyond his truck, all wearing truckers' clothing, all standing perfectly still, all watching with empty eyes. They stood at regular intervals along both sides of the highway, stretching back into darkness as far as he could see. None of them moved. None of them blinked. They simply stood and stared with expressions of absolute despair. He ran back to his truck, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He climbed into the cab and slammed the door, locking it with trembling hands. The men didn't follow. They simply stood in their positions, silent witnesses to whatever nightmare he'd driven into. Marcus shifted into gear and accelerated, the engine roaring as he fled from the abandoned Freightliner and its impossible cargo. The highway continued its endless loop, but now Marcus understood the truth. He wasn't driving on Interstate 80 anymore. He'd somehow slipped into a space between moments, a temporal pocket where time didn't flow correctly. The other drivers he'd seen, they'd all been caught here too, trapped in their own loops, their own moments, eventually joining the silent watchers along the roadside. Marcus drove for what felt like days, though his watch remained frozen at 2:47 a.m. He tried everything he could think of, driving in reverse, turning off the highway onto the shoulder, even attempting to crash through the guardrail. Nothing worked. The highway was absolute, unchanging, eternal. He began to understand why the other drivers had eventually given up, abandoning their trucks to join the watchers. Then, As suddenly as it had begun, everything changed. At exactly 2:47 a.m. by his frozen watch, Marcus felt a lurch, as though his truck had dropped several inches. The odometer jumped forward, the numbers spinning rapidly, adding hundreds of miles in seconds. His fuel gauge plummeted to empty. The GPS signal returned, showing him 87 miles past where he should be. His phone erupted with notifications. Missed calls, messages, alerts, all timestamped from the past 6 hours. The highway transformed. Exit signs appeared. Other vehicles materialized around him. Cars, trucks, normal traffic. The sun was rising ahead of him, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Marcus coasted on fumes to the next truck stop, his entire body shaking with exhaustion and relief. When he checked his logbook, it showed he'd been driving continuously for 6 hours, but he had no memory of any of it except the endless loop. Marcus completed his delivery to Omaha, then drove straight home and quit his job. He sold his truck and never drove commercially again. But sometimes, late at night, he wakes up with the certainty that his watch has stopped at 2:47 a.m., and he's terrified to look at it, afraid he'll see the numbers frozen once again, signaling his return to the mirror highway where time forgets to move forward and drivers become permanent residents of a single endless moment. Story 2. The Breathing Cargo. Diane Martinez had spent 12 years hauling specialized freight across the southwestern United States, building a reputation for handling unusual and high-value shipments that other drivers wouldn't touch. Her modified Kenworth T680 was equipped with climate control systems and advanced monitoring equipment, making her the go-to driver for temperature-sensitive and delicate cargo. On March 3, 2021, she received a contract offer that paid triple her usual rate for a simple overnight delivery from Phoenix, Arizona to Albuquerque, New Mexico. The cargo was listed as biological research materials, requiring constant temperature maintenance at exactly 37 degrees Celsius, human body temperature. The loading took place at an unmarked warehouse on the outskirts of Phoenix at 9 p.m. 3 men in unmarked uniforms supervised the process, watching as a large shipping container was loaded into Diane's trailer using a forklift. The container was approximately 8 feet long, 4 feet wide, and 4 feet tall, constructed of brushed aluminum with no visible markings except for a small digital display showing the internal temperature. The men made Diane sign an extensive non-disclosure agreement and provided her with a special monitoring tablet that would track the container's temperature throughout the journey. Do not open the container under any circumstances, the lead supervisor told her, his voice flat and emotionless. Do not stop except for fuel. Do not deviate from the programmed route. If the temperature variance exceeds 2 degrees in either direction for more than 60 seconds, call this number immediately. He handed her a card with a phone number printed in red ink. Someone will be monitoring your progress. Drive safely, Ms. Martinez. Diane secured the container with extra straps and began her journey onto Interstate 10, heading east toward New Mexico. The night was cool and clear, with minimal traffic on the highway. She kept the trailer's climate control system running at full capacity, and the monitoring tablet showed the container maintaining a steady 37 degrees. Everything seemed routine for the first 2 hours. At 11:23 p.m., as Diane passed through a particularly isolated stretch of desert between Phoenix and Tucson, she heard a sound from the trailer, a low, rhythmic thumping, like something striking the interior walls. She checked the monitoring tablet, but all readings appeared normal. The temperature held steady, and there were no alerts. She convinced herself it was just a container shifting slightly as the truck moved, perhaps settling into a more stable position. Then she heard it again, louder this time and unmistakably deliberate. Thump, thump, thump. 3 distinct impacts, evenly spaced, coming from inside her trailer. Diane's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The contract had specified biological research materials, but the shipping container was large enough to hold a person. She'd hauled medical equipment before, even cadavers for teaching hospitals, but something about this cargo felt fundamentally different. The thumping developing into a pattern. 3 quick strikes, followed by 2 slow ones, then silence for exactly 30 seconds before repeating. Diane grabbed her CB radio to call back to the warehouse, but before she could key the microphone, Her phone rang. The screen showed the red number from the card the supervisor had given her. She answered, her voice uncertain. Ms. Martinez, we're detecting unusual vibration patterns in your cargo. The voice was different from the supervisor's. Female, clinical, utterly devoid of warmth. This is normal. Do not be alarmed. Do not stop. Do not open the container. The materials are temperature sensitive and responding to the transport environment. Continue to your destination. What exactly am I hauling? Diane asked, her professional curiosity overriding her growing unease. That information is classified. You signed the NDA. Continue to your destination. The line went dead. Diane drove on, but the sounds from the trailer escalated. The thumping gave way to scratching, long, deliberate scrapes against a metal interior, as though something with claws or fingernails was trying to mark the walls. The monitoring tablet continued to show normal readings, but Diane could hear the sounds clearly through the insulated walls of her cab. Whatever was in that container was alive, conscious, and trying to communicate. At 1:45 a.m., Diane stopped at a truck stop outside of Tucson for fuel, as permitted by her contract, while the diesel pumped into her tanks. She walked around the back of her trailer, considering whether to break her agreement and open the container. The scratching had stopped, replaced by a new sound, breathing. Deep, ragged breaths that shouldn't have been audible through the aluminum walls of the container, yet somehow resonated through the entire trailer. A tap on her shoulder made Diane spin around, her heart leaping into her throat. A state trooper stood behind her, his expression neutral. Everything all right, ma'am? You look distressed. Diane's mouth opened, and for a moment, she considered telling him everything. The strange contract, the breathing cargo, the monitoring calls. But the NDA she'd signed had included criminal penalties for disclosure, and she needed this money. Her daughter's college tuition was due, and this single run would cover the entire semester. Just tired, she managed. Long night. The trooper studied her for a moment, then nodded. Drive safe. He walked back to his patrol car and drove away, leaving Diane alone with her breathing cargo. She finished fueling and returned to highway, her nerves stretched to the breaking point. The breathing continued, growing louder and more labored, as though whatever was inside the container was physical exertion. The monitoring tablet showed the temperature beginning to rise, 37.3 degrees, then 37.5, then 37.8. Diane adjusted the trailer's cooling system, pushing it to maximum capacity. The temperature stabilized at 37.9 degrees, just under the 2-degree variance threshold that would trigger an alert. The breathing in the trailer had become a panting, desperate, and animalistic. Diane's imagination ran wild with possibilities. A diseased patient being transported illegally, an animal subject from a research facility. Something worse that her mind refused to fully conceptualize. At 2:30 a.m., while driving through a particularly dark stretch of highway with no other vehicles in sight, Diane's headlights caught something on the road ahead. A woman stood in the center of the lane, wearing a hospital gown, her hair wild and matted. Her skin was pale, impossibly pale, almost luminescent in the darkness. She raised her arms above her head, signaling Diane to stop. Diane swerved to avoid the woman, her truck's air brakes shrieking as she fought to maintain control. The trailer fishtailed, and for a terrifying moment, she thought the entire rig would jackknife. She managed to straighten out and looked in her mirror, expecting to see the woman standing in the road behind her. The highway was empty. No woman. No evidence anyone had been there at all. Her phone rang again, the red number. She answered, her voice shaking. Do not stop for pedestrians, the clinical voice said. They are not real. The cargo produces certain effects that may cause hallucinations. This is normal. Continue to your destination. What the hell is in my trailer? Diane shouted into the phone. Continue to your destination. You have 3 hours remaining. The line went dead again. The breathing in the trailer had transformed into something else, a wet, gurgling sound, as though the thing inside was drowning. Diane checked the monitoring tablet and saw the temperature had spiked to 39.2 degrees, well over the threshold, before she could reach for her phone. It rang. We're aware of the temperature increase. The voice said, we're adjusting remotely. Do not alter your trailer's climate settings. I didn't change anything, Diane protested. The cargo is generating its own heat now. This is expected. Continue to your destination. Over the next hour, the sounds from the trailer became increasingly disturbing. The breathing was accompanied by whispered words, or what sounded like words, though Diane couldn't quite make out the language. It wasn't English, and it wasn't Spanish, despite her fluency in both. The syllables were wrong, somehow, shaped in ways that human vocal cords would produce. At 3:45 a.m., Diane saw more figures along the roadside, dozens of them, all wearing hospital gowns, all with that same impossible pallor. They stood at regular intervals, watching her truck pass with expressions of longing and desperation. Some reached out toward her as she drove by, their movements jerky and unnatural. Diane forced herself to focus on the road ahead, refusing to look at them, trying to convince herself they were hallucinations as the voice on the phone had claimed. The monitoring tablet erupted with alerts. The temperature inside the container had dropped suddenly to 34.2 degrees, well below the acceptable range. The breathing sound stopped completely, replaced by an absolute silence that was somehow more terrifying than all the previous noises combined. Diane's phone rang. The cargo has entered dormancy, the voice said. This is normal. Continue to your destination. Do not attempt to warm the container. The temperature will regulate naturally. What happens when I deliver this? Diane asked, what are you people doing? You will receive your payment within 24 hours. The NDA remains in effect for life. Violation will result in prosecution. Continue to your destination. Diane drove on to darkness, her mind racing with possibilities, none of them good. She'd hauled strange cargo before, but nothing that generated its own heat. Nothing that breathed and scratched and whispered in impossible languages. The container in her trailer held something that shouldn't exist, something that prompted hallucinations and temperature fluctuations that defied physics. At 5:47 a.m., as dawn began to break over the New Mexico desert, Diane arrived at her destination, another unmarked warehouse on the outskirts of Albuquerque. The same 3 men in unmarked uniforms were waiting for her. They unloaded the container with the same careful efficiency they'd shown in Phoenix, and Diane noticed frost had formed on the aluminum surface despite the trailer's heating system running at full capacity. What was in there? Diane asked as the lead supervisor handed her a tablet to sign for the delivery. He looked at her with eyes that seemed older than his face, tired beyond measure. Nothing that concerns you anymore, Ms. Martinez. Go home. Forget this delivery. And if you're smart, you'll refuse the next contract we offer you. There'll be a next time. There's always a next time. We need drivers who can handle the unusual, and you've proven yourself. The question is whether you can handle it again. Diane watched them wheel the container into the warehouse, the aluminum walls still coated with frost that shouldn't exist. She climbed back into her truck and drove away, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed her from the trailer. For days, she heard breathing in empty rooms, felt eyes watching her from dark corners, saw pale figures at the edges of her vision that vanished when she looked directly at them. The payment arrived as promised, triple rate, enough to cover her daughter's tuition and more. 3 weeks later, another contract offer appeared in her email, this one offering 4 times her usual rate for a similar run. Diane stared at the offer for a long time, her finger hovering over the delete button. She thought about the breathing, the scratching, the whispered words in impossible languages. She thought about the pale figures along the roadside and the frost on the aluminum container. She accepted the contract, not because she needed the money, though she did. She accepted because she needed to understand what she'd hauled, what breathed and froze and whispered in the darkness of her trailer. Some mysteries demand answers, even when those answers might cost your sanity. Diane Martinez made 17 more runs for the unmarked warehouse over the following year, each one strange than the last, each one leaving her a little more change, a little more connected to whatever existed in those aluminum containers. And every night, she falls asleep to the sound of breathing that isn't her own, wondering when the cargo will finally claim her completely. Story 3. The Stolen Hours. Raymond Foster had driven commercial trucks for 23 years without incident, maintaining a perfect safety record and never missing a scheduled delivery window. His attention to detail and time management skills made him a favorite among dispatchers who needed critical shipments moved efficiently across the Pacific Northwest. On November 8, 2020, Raymond accepted a routine assignment hauling electronics from Seattle, Washington to Portland, Oregon, a simple 3-hour drive down Interstate 5 that he'd completed hundreds of times before. Raymond departed from the Seattle warehouse at precisely 11 p.m., his Volvo VNL 780 loaded with pallets of computer equipment worth approximately $2 million. The cargo was insured and required signature confirmation upon delivery at 6 a.m. the following morning, giving him a 7-hour window for a 3-hour drive. Plenty of cushion for delays. The night was typical for November in the Northwest. Heavy rain, low visibility, and minimal traffic on the highway. He drove steadily through the darkness, his windshield wipers maintaining a constant rhythm against the downpour. His GPS showed him making good progress, and he passed familiar landmarks right on schedule. The truck stop at milepost 154, the bridge over the Cowlitz River, the exit for Castle Rock. Everything appeared completely normal. Raymond checked his watch at 12:47 a.m. and calculated he'd reach Portland with nearly 4 hours to spare. At 1 a.m., Raymond pulled into a rest area to use the facilities and grab an energy drink from his cooler. The rest area was empty, the parking lot illuminated by sodium vapor lights that turned the rain into orange streaks. He locked his truck and walked quickly to the restroom building, keeping his head down against the cold rain. The entire stop took less than 5 minutes. When Raymond climbed back into his truck and checked his dashboard clock, it read 5:23 a.m. 4 hours and 8 minutes had somehow passed during his 5-minute rest stop. His heart began to pound as he grabbed his cell phone and checked the time, 5:23 a.m., matching his dashboard. His watch showed the same impossible time. Raymond stared at the numbers in disbelief, his mind refusing to accept what his eyes were seeing. He checked his truck's electronic logbook, which automatically recorded all vehicle activity. According to the system, his truck had been parked at the rest area for exactly 4 hours and 8 minutes, with no movement, no engine activity, nothing. The GPS showed him still at the same rest area, having traveled 0 miles since his arrival. But Raymond's memory was crystal clear. He'd been gone for 5 minutes at most. Panic rising, Raymond shifted into gear and accelerated back onto the highway, desperate to reach Portland before his 6 a.m. delivery window closed. His GPS recalculated the route and informed him he was now 93 miles from his destination with 37 minutes to arrive. Impossible. Even if he pushed his speed to dangerous levels, he couldn't cover that distance in time. He grabbed a CB radio and called out on Channel 19. Breaker 19, this is Steel Runner, looking for any driver who might have seen my rig at the rest area near milepost 72. I need to know if anyone saw me parked there. This is urgent. A response crackled through the speaker almost immediately. Steel Runner, this is Midnight Express. Yeah, I saw your rig there. You've been parked at that rest stop for hours, brother. I passed you twice, once at 1:30 and again at 4:45 when I came back north. You okay? I was only there for 5 minutes, Raymond insisted, his voice rising with stress. Negative on that, Steel Runner. Your truck was dark and locked up tight both times I passed. Figured you were taking a long rest break. You sure you're okay? You sound shook up. Raymond dropped the CB microphone and focused on driving, pushing his truck to 75 miles per hour despite the rain and poor visibility. His mind raced, trying to rationalize what had happened. Had he fallen asleep somehow? Experienced some kind of medical episode? But the electronic logbook showed his truck had been completely inactive. Engine off, no movement. That would indicate he'd been inside it sleeping. At 5:47 a.m., Raymond's phone rang. The screen showed his dispatcher's number. He answered, already knowing what he was about to hear. Raymond, where the hell are you? The dispatcher's voice was tight with anger. Your delivery window opens in 13 minutes, and our GPS shows you still 60 miles out. You've never missed a delivery in 23 years. What's going on? I lost time. Raymond said, the words sounding insane even as he spoke them. I stop at a rest area for 5 minutes, and somehow 4 hours passed. I don't know how to explain it. Lost time? Raymond, are you high? Have you been drinking? I'm stone sober. Something happened. Something impossible. The dispatcher was silent for a long moment. Get here as fast as you safely can. I'm calling the client to explain we'll be late. You and I are having a serious conversation when you arrive. Raymond pushes speed to 80 miles per hour, the rain hammering his windshield. His GPS continued counting down the miles and minutes, the numbers making it clear he wouldn't arrive before 6:30 a.m. at the earliest. He'd never been late before, never had a blemish on his driving record, and now his perfect reputation was being destroyed by 4 stolen hours that he couldn't explain or understand. As he drove through the pre-dawn darkness, Raymond noticed something disturbing. The mile markers along the highway weren't increasing correctly. He passed milepost 119, then 120, then 119 again. He blinked hard, convinced his exhausted eyes were playing tricks on him. But when he looked again, the pattern repeated: 120, 121, 120, 121. The highway was looping, repeating the same mile over and over. Raymond slowed his truck and pulled onto the shoulder, his hands trembling on the steering wheel. He grabbed his phone and pulled up the GPS map, zooming in on his exact location. The blue that represented his truck was moving backward along the highway, retracing his route even though he was driving forward. He watched in horror as the dot moved north toward Seattle instead of south toward Portland. He got out of his truck despite the pouring rain and walked around to the front, checking his headlights to confirm they were pointing in the correct direction. Everything appeared normal. He climbed back in and checked his compass. The needle pointed south, confirming he was traveling in the right direction. But the GPS insisted he was moving north, and the mile markers continued their impossible loop. Raymond's phone rang again. The dispatcher's voice was confused this time, the anger replaced by bewilderment. Raymond, our GPS tracking shows you moving north, away from Portland. What are you doing? South on I-5, just like I'm supposed to be, Raymond insisted. I'm watching the road signs. I'm going the right direction. Our system shows you near milepost 120, traveling north at 80 miles per hour. You're heading back toward Seattle. Raymond looked at the mile marker passing outside his window. Milepost 120, same as it had been for the past several minutes. The impossible loop continued, trapping him in a single mile of highway that repeated endlessly. He pressed harder on the accelerator, determined to break through whatever phenomenon was holding him. But the GPS continued showing him moving backward. At 6 a.m., exactly when he should have been arriving in Portland, Raymond's truck suddenly lurched, as though it had broken through some invisible barrier. The GPS corrected itself instantly, showing him at milepost 175, still 60 miles north of his delivery point. The mile markers began increasing normally again, the loop broken, but 5 more hours had somehow vanished. His dashboard clock now read 11:08 a.m. Raymond pulled into a truck stop, his body shaking with exhaustion and fear. He'd been driving for what felt like 30 minutes since leaving the rest area, but according to every clock and every digital device he owned, 10 hours had passed. 10 hours stolen from his life, compressed into subjective minutes, while objective time raced forward without him. His phone showed 47 missed calls from the dispatcher, along with a termination notice sent via email. The client in Portland had refused a late delivery and filed a breach of contract claim. Raymond's perfect record was destroyed, his reputation ruined, his job gone, and he had no explanation that anyone would believe. Raymond spent the next several hours sitting in his truck at the parking lot, researching missing time phenomena on his phone. He found dozens of accounts from other people who'd experienced similar events. Time skips, temporal loops, hours that vanished without explanation. Most were dismissed as false memories, sleep deprivation, or mental health episodes. But Raymond knew what he'd experienced was real. Over the following weeks, Raymond became obsessed with understanding what had happened to him. He drove back to the rest area where the first time skip occurred, arriving at exactly 1:15 a.m., the same time as his original stop. He sat in his parked truck with his phone camera, recording continuously, determined to capture evidence of whatever phenomenon existed at that location. At 1:22 a.m., his phone's recording suddenly jumped forward. One moment, the timestamp showed 1 hour, 22 minutes, and 47 seconds, and the next it showed 4 hours, 31 minutes, and 15 seconds. 3 hours and 8 minutes had vanished again, compressed into a single frame of video. Raymond watched the recording in horror. There was no glitch, no corruption, just a clean jump from one timestamp to another. The world outside his windows had gone from complete darkness to pre-dawn gray in the space between 1 second and the next. Raymond conducted this experiment 17 more times over the following months, documenting each instance of missing time. The phenomenon wasn't consistent. Sometimes he lost 3 hours, sometimes 7, occasionally only 45 minutes. But the rest area at milepost 72 was clearly a nexus point, a location where time didn't flow correctly. He tried to warn other drivers on the CB radio, posting messages in trucker forums and social media groups. Most dismissed him as crazy or attention-seeking. A few responded with their own stories of missing time on various highways across the country. Rest areas where hours vanished, truck stops where watches stopped working correctly, stretches of road where GPS systems showed impossible locations. Raymond never worked as a commercial driver again. His DOT medical certification was revoked after he failed a psychological evaluation, the examiner citing delusional beliefs regarding temporal anomalies as grounds for disqualification. He lives now in a small apartment in Portland, still documenting his research, still trying to understand the nature of the phenomenon that destroyed his career. His walls are covered with maps marked with red dots, locations where drivers have reported missing time. The pattern suggests something larger, a network of temporal weak points scattered across North America's highway system. Raymond has calculated that approximately 1 in every 40,000 drivers experiences at least one instance of significant time loss. They'll most attribute to fatigue or memory errors rather than accepting the impossible truth. At night, Raymond sometimes drives past the rest area at milepost 72, watching other trucks pull in for innocent rest stops, wondering how many of those drivers will lose hours from their lives without ever understanding why. He's tried to get authorities interested, state police, federal transportation officials, even scientists at nearby universities. No one takes him seriously. The stolen hours remain a mystery, continuing to claim time from unsuspecting travelers while the world refuses to acknowledge their existence. Raymond keeps driving past that rest area, documenting, recording, measuring. He's lost 3 years of his life in accumulated missing hours during his experiments. But he can't stop. Someone needs to understand this phenomenon, to map its patterns and warn others. Even if that someone is a disgraced truck driver whom everyone believes is insane. The hours continue to be stolen, second by second, minute by minute, compressed into subjective moments, while objective reality races forward, and Raymond Foster remains the only witness willing to testify possible truth that time itself is broken in certain places, and no amount of careful driving can protect you when the road decides to steal your hours. Story 4. The Passenger Seat. Kenneth Walsh had been driving dedicated routes for a logistics company for 15 years, primarily handling overnight deliveries between distribution centers across the Midwest. His Freightliner Cascadia had logged over 800,000 miles, and Kenneth knew every rattle and quirk of his truck intimately. On January 19, 2022, Kenneth was making his regular run from Indianapolis, Indiana to Kansas City, Missouri, a route he'd driven 3 times per week for the past 6 years. The weather was clear, the roads were dry, and Kenneth expected another routine night of driving. He departed Indianapolis at 8:30 p.m., his trailer loaded with manufactured goods bound for retail distribution. Kenneth's truck was equipped with the latest safety technology, lane departure warnings, collision avoidance systems, and a sophisticated dash camera that recorded both the road ahead and the cab interior. He'd installed the interior camera himself after his insurance company offered a discount for trucks with driver monitoring systems. At 10:45 p.m., while cruising along Interstate 70 through rural Illinois, Kenneth's peripheral vision caught movement in his passenger seat. He turned his head, expecting to see his jacket or a bag shifting from road vibration, but instead found himself looking at a woman sitting in the passenger seat. She was middle-aged, wearing clothes from what appeared to be the 1980s, a denim jacket over a floral print dress, her hair styled in an outdated perm. She stared straight ahead through the windshield, not acknowledging Kenneth's presence at all. Kenneth's heart hammered against his ribs. The passenger door was locked from the inside, as it had been since he'd started his journey. His truck had been moving at 70 miles per hour on an isolated stretch of highway. There was no possible way someone could have entered his cab. Yet the woman sat there, solid and real, her chest rising and falling with steady breaths. "Who the hell are you?" Kenneth demanded, his voice coming out as a strangled whisper. "How did you get in here?" The woman didn't respond. She continued staring through the windshield as though Kenneth hadn't spoken at all. Her hands rested in her lap, and Kenneth noticed she wore a wedding ring on her left hand. She appeared completely ordinary, not threatening, not ghostly, just a normal woman sitting in his passenger seat, as though she'd been there all along. Kenneth's first instinct was to pull over and force the woman out of his truck, but a deeper survival instinct held him back. Something about this situation felt fundamentally wrong in a way that transcended normal logic. He reached for a CB radio, planning a call for help, but when he looked back at the passenger seat, the woman was gone. The seat was empty, exactly as it should be. Kenneth pulled onto the shoulder and engaged his hazard lights, his entire body shaking. He grabbed his phone and reviewed the footage from his dash camera, rewinding to the moment when he'd first seen the woman. The interior camera showed him driving normally, then turning his head to look at the passenger seat, which was empty in the recording. The camera showed no woman, no unexplained presence, just Kenneth reacting to something that apparently didn't exist. He played the footage 3 more times, analyzing every frame. The camera never showed anyone in the passenger seat. Yet Kenneth's memory of the woman was crystal clear. Her face, her clothing, the way her hands rested in her lap. He hadn't imagined her. She'd been real enough to make him question his sanity, real enough to fill him with primal terror. Kenneth forced himself to continue driving, checking the passenger seat every few seconds to confirm it remained empty. He tried to rationalize what he'd seen: fatigue, a hallucination, stress-induced illusion. But Kenneth had driven tired before, had logged plenty of late nights, and he'd never experienced anything like this. The woman had been solid, three-dimensional, absolutely convincing in her reality. At 11:52 p.m., she appeared again. One moment the passenger seat was empty, and the next a woman was there, sitting in exactly the same position, staring straight ahead with the same blank expression. This time Kenneth kept his eyes on the road, refusing to acknowledge her presence. He told himself that if he ignored her, she would disappear again, but she didn't disappear. Kenneth drove for 20 minutes with the woman sitting silently beside him, her presence filling the cab with an atmosphere of wrongness that made his skin crawl. He could hear her breathing, slow, steady breaths that didn't quite match a normal human rhythm. The sound was too regular, too mechanical, like a recording of breathing rather than the real thing. "What do you want?" Kenneth finally asked, his voice tight with fear. The woman's head turned slowly toward him, and Kenneth saw her eyes for the first time. They were completely black, not dark brown or shadow, but absolute black from edge to edge, without visible pupils or sclera. Those impossible eyes fixed on Kenneth with an intensity that made him feel as though he were being examined by something wearing a human shape rather than something genuinely human. When she spoke, her voice came from all around him rather than from her mouth specifically. The words seemed to originate from the truck speakers, from the air itself, from inside Kenneth's own skull. "You're driving my road." "What does that mean?" Kenneth asked, his hands gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. "This is my road, my route, territory. You've driven it 622 times. You know every exit, every mile marker, every truck stop. The road knows you now. The road remembers." Kenneth glanced at the woman again, and her appearance had changed. Her 1980s clothing had transformed into a more modern style, though still slightly outdated. Her hair was different, darker, cut shorter. As he watched, her appearance continued to shift. Different clothes, different hair, different facial features, cycling through variations as though he were seeing multiple people overlaid on the same space. "Who are you?" Kenneth whispered. I am everyone who died on this road. The woman's or women's voices multiplied, creating a chorus that filled the cab. I am the accident at mile marker 47. I am the jackknifed semi at mile marker 103. I am the drunk driver at mile marker 78. I am every moment of impact, every life that ended on this asphalt, and you drive over us. Night after night, week after week, year after year, the road remembers every death, and now the road is sharing its memory with you. Kenneth's truck drifted slightly across the center line, and his lane departure warning system beeped urgently. He corrected his steering, but his attention remained fixed on the constantly shifting figure in his passenger seat. The face cycled through dozens of variations, men, women, young, old, all staring at it with those same black eyes. I didn't kill any of you, Kenneth said, his voice shaking. I'm just a driver trying to do my job. You drive over our graves. This asphalt was poured over our blood. You breathe the air where our last breaths were taken. The road binds us here, and your wheels grinding over us night after night have made you part of the binding. You are connected to us now. You are one of the road's witnesses. The figure reached out with one hand, placing it on Kenneth's shoulder. The touch was cold, not the cold of living flesh in winter, but the absolute cold of something that had never been alive, or had stopped being alive so long ago that it had forgotten what warm felt like. Kenneth tried to pull away, but the hand remained fixed on his shoulder with impossible strength. You will see us from now on, the voices said. Every journey, every mile, we will ride with you, showing you where we died, how we died, why we died. The road has chosen you as its historian, its repository of memory. You will carry our stories until you join us. Kenneth wrenched the steering wheel hard to the right, pulling his truck onto the shoulder with a screech of tires and a cloud of dust. He slammed on the brakes, bringing the truck to a complete stop, and turned to confront the figure in his passenger seat. The seat was empty again. The hand on his shoulder was gone. The cab was silent except for the idling diesel engine. He grabbed his phone and checked the dash camera footage again. The interior camera showed him driving normally, then suddenly jerking the wheel and pulling over. There was no figure in the passenger seat, no hand on his shoulder, no evidence of anything unusual except Kenneth's own reaction to something the camera couldn't see. Kenneth sat in his stopped truck for over an hour, trying to calm his racing heart and convince himself to continue driving. He called his dispatcher and claimed mechanical problems, buying himself time to decide whether he could complete the journey. The dispatcher authorized him to continue at his own pace, and Kenneth eventually forced himself back onto the highway. The woman didn't reappear for the rest of the journey to Kansas City, but Kenneth felt her presence constantly. A weight in the passenger seat, a cold spot in the air, a sense of being watched and evaluated. He delivered his cargo at 6:30 a.m. and immediately drove to a hotel, where he slept fitfully through the day, his dreams filled with shifting faces and black eyes. Kenneth made 17 more runs on his regular Indianapolis-Kansas City route over the following weeks, and the passenger appeared on 14 of them. Each time she, or they, since the appearance constantly changed, told him about deaths that had occurred on specific stretches of highway. Mile marker 47, where Jennifer Harris died in 1987 when her car hydroplaned in a rainstorm. Mile marker 103, where Carlos Rodriguez jackknifed a semi in 2003, crushing 3 vehicles. Mile marker 78, where Timothy Chun was killed by a drunk driver in 2015. Kenneth researched each story, using newspaper archives and accident databases. Every single one was accurate. The passenger was telling him about real deaths, real people who'd been killed on exact stretches of highway where they appeared in his truck. The road was indeed sharing its memory, using Kenneth as a witness to decades of tragedy. He tried changing routes, accepting assignments that ran different corridors. But the phenomenon followed him. Different passengers appeared on different highways, each one representing the death specific to that route. A teenager on Interstate 80 in Iowa, a family on Highway 36 in Missouri, an elderly man on Interstate 55 in Illinois. The road's dead traveled with Kenneth wherever he drove, claiming his passenger seat as their domain. Kenneth's driving performance deteriorated as the manifestations increased. He became distracted, exhausted from lack of sleep, paranoid about entering his truck each night. His dispatcher received complaints from clients about late deliveries and missed appointments. Kenneth tried to explain what was happening, but couldn't find words that didn't make him sound insane. After the first appearance, Kenneth was driving through central Illinois when the passenger spoke words that chilled him to his core. The shifting figure, cycling through its usual variety of faces, turned those black eyes on him and said, "You'll join us soon." Mile marker 167. 3 weeks from Tuesday, 2:47 a.m. The road has already marked you. Kenneth quit his job the next day. He sold his truck, moved to a city with comprehensive public transportation, and refused to drive at all. He took work as a warehouse manager, staying off the highways, avoiding long-distance travel. He convinced himself that by not driving, he could avoid the fate the passenger had predicted. But 3 weeks from the day of that final prophecy, on a Tuesday night, Kenneth's apartment building caught fire. He evacuated safely, but in the chaos of the emergency, he accepted a ride from a co-worker who offered to drive him to a hotel. They took Interstate 55 south, and at 2:47 a.m., they passed mile marker 167. A semi-truck crossed a median without warning, its driver having fallen asleep at the wheel. The collision was instantaneous and catastrophic. Kenneth's co-worker survived with serious injuries. Kenneth Walsh was killed on impact at exactly the time and location the passenger had predicted. 3 nights after Kenneth's death, a truck driver named Patricia Lee was making a delivery run along Interstate 55 in Illinois. At approximately 10:45 p.m., her dash camera showed her turning suddenly to look at her passenger seat, her face registering shock and fear. The interior camera showed the seat was empty, but Patricia clearly saw something the camera could not. She pulled over onto the shoulder and sat there for 20 minutes before continuing her journey. Patricia later reported to her dispatcher that she'd seen a man in her passenger seat, middle-aged, wearing a trucking company uniform, staring straight ahead with eyes that were completely, impossibly black. And when the figure spoke, it told her about an accident that happened at mile marker 167 just 3 days earlier, where a driver named Kenneth Walsh had died exactly when the road's memory had predicted. The road remembers every death. And now Kenneth Walsh rides with other drivers, another face in the shifting multitude, another voice in the chorus that haunts the passenger seats of long-haul trucks, telling a story to those the road chooses as witnesses. The phenomenon continues, spreading across highways throughout the country, claiming more drivers as collectors of its tragic memory, ensuring that no death on these roads is ever truly forgotten, and no driver who learns the road's secrets can ever truly escape. Story 5. The Way Station. Thomas Brennan had been hauling freight across the states for 19 years, building a career on reliability and strict adherence to federal regulations. His Mac anthem was always properly maintained, his logbooks always accurate, and his cargo always correctly documented and secured. On July 27, 2021, Thomas was driving a load of industrial machinery from Houston, Texas to Atlanta, Georgia along Interstate 10, a route he'd traveled dozens of times without incident. At 3:15 a.m., somewhere in Louisiana, he approached a way station that shouldn't have existed. Thomas knew every way station along his regular routes, their locations, their operating hours, their typical procedures. The stretch of I-10 through rural Louisiana had only 2 permanent way stations, and Thomas had already passed the second one 40 miles back. Yet ahead of him, clearly visible in his headlights, was a third way station with its signals commanding him to enter for inspection. The facility appeared old, not aged by weather neglect, but old in design, as though it had been built decades ago and never updated. The scale house was constructed of brick rather than the modern prefabricated metal buildings typical of newer stations. Yellow lights illuminated the inspection area with a sickly glow that made the surrounding darkness seem even more oppressive. A single vehicle was ahead of Thomas, another semi that was just pulling onto the scales. Thomas followed the required procedure, slowing his truck and carefully positioning his rig on the scales. Through his passenger window, he could see into the scale house, where an inspector in an outdated Department of Transportation uniform sat at a desk. The inspector's appearance matched the facility's vintage aesthetic. His uniform style hadn't been standard since the 1970s, and the equipment visible in the scale house appeared equally antiquated. The inspector's voice crackled through a speaker mounted on a pole beside Thomas's truck. "Cut your engine. Proceed to the inspection bay." The voice was distorted, as though it were being transmitted through old equipment or across a great distance. Thomas complied, shifting into gear and rolling forward to the inspection area. The truck that had been ahead of him was parked in the adjacent bay, its driver standing beside the trailer, while another inspector examined the cargo. Thomas climbed down from his cab, his paperwork in hand, and approached the inspector who waited for him. The inspector's face was wrong, not obviously deformed or monstrous, but wrong in subtle ways that made Thomas's instincts scream warnings. The proportions were slightly off, eyes spaced too widely, mouth positioned too low, ears set at angles that didn't quite match human anatomy. Yet the inspector moved and spoke like a normal person, creating a cognitive dissonance that made Thomas's skin crawl. "Manifest," the inspector said, a hand. Thomas handed over his cargo documentation, watching as the inspector reviewed the papers with methodical attention. The inspector's eyes, a pale gray color that seemed to reflect light like an animal's, scanned each page before moving to the next. "Your cargo mass doesn't match your manifest," the inspector said, his tone flat and emotionless. "The scales show your combined vehicle weight as 78,400 pounds, but your manifest documents only 62,000 pounds of cargo." Explain the discrepancy. Thomas's stomach tightened. He'd weighed his truck at the Houston terminal before departure, and the weight had matched his manifest perfectly. "There must be an error with your scales," Thomas said carefully, knowing that challenging a DOT inspector could result in additional scrutiny and delays. "I can show you the certified weight ticket from my departure terminal. Our scales are calibrated correctly." The inspector's strange eyes fixed on Thomas with an intensity that made him want to step backward. "There is excess mass in your vehicle. We need to inspect your cargo." The inspector walked to the back of Thomas's trailer and began unfastening the door seals. Thomas followed, his mind racing through possibilities. Had someone added unauthorized cargo to his load? Was this some kind of setup? The inspector opened the trailer doors, and yellow light from the inspection bay illuminated the interior. Thomas's cargo was exactly as it should be: 3 large pieces of industrial machinery, properly secured and documented. But arranged among the machines were dozens of additional items that hadn't been there when Thomas had sealed the trailer in Houston. Old suitcases stacked in neat piles, cardboard boxes bound with twine, wooden crates with faded shipping labels. All of it covered in a layer of dust that suggested these items had been there for years rather than the few hours Thomas had been driving. "What the hell?" Thomas climbed into the trailer, his flashlight beam sweeping across the unauthorized cargo. "This wasn't here when I loaded. Someone broke into my trailer." The inspector climbed in behind him, moving with an unnatural fluidity that made Thomas's flesh crawl. "This cargo belongs to the station. It's been waiting for pickup. You're transporting items that were never checked in, never processed, never released for delivery. That's a serious violation." Thomas spun to face the inspector, anger overriding his fear. "I didn't load any of this. My trailer was sealed with a numbered security tag. Look!" He pointed to the trailer door, where his company security seal hung undisturbed, its serial number matching his paperwork. "The seal is irrelevant." The inspector's voice remained flat, devoid of any emotion. "The cargo is in your possession. You are responsible. Each item must be documented and you can leave." Thomas looked around the trailer in growing horror. There were at least 50 suitcases and boxes mixed among his legitimate cargo, each one apparently requiring individual inspection and documentation. This process could take hours or days. "I have a delivery deadline," Thomas protested. "I need to be in Atlanta by tomorrow afternoon." "Time works differently here," the inspector said, and Thomas realized with creeping dread that the statement was both a threat and a warning. "Each item contains personal belongings from travelers who pass through the station. Each one needs to be cataloged. Open that suitcase there." The inspector pointed to a large leather suitcase near Thomas's feet. Thomas knelt and unfastened the corroded latches, opening the case to reveal clothing from another era. Men's suits from the 1950s or 60s, neatly folded, along with personal items including a wallet, a watch, and a stack of letters bound with rubber band. Thomas opened the wallet and found a driver's license issued in 1963 to a man named Robert Harrison. Robert Harrison died in 1964. The inspector said, "Vehicle accident on Interstate 10, approximately 6 miles east of this location. His belongings were collected but never returned to his family. They've been waiting here for processing. Open the next case." With shaking hands, Thomas opened another suitcase, then another, each one containing personal effects from someone who died on this stretch of highway decades ago. Clothing, jewelry, photographs, letters, all the small treasures that people carry with them, preserved in these cases like museum exhibits. The dates on the items range from the 1950s to the 1990s, representing decades of traffic fatalities. "Why are these in my trailer?" Thomas demanded, his voice rising. "This is insane. I'm leaving." He climbed out of the trailer and started walking toward his cab, but the inspector moved with impossible speed to block his path. "You can't leave until the cargo is processed. Those are the regulations. Every item must be documented. Every piece must be cataloged. It's been waiting so long for someone to complete the paperwork." Thomas looked around the weigh station and noticed for the first time that the other truck that had been ahead of him was still parked in the adjacent bay. The driver stood motionless beside his trailer, staring at nothing, as though he'd been frozen mid-action. Thomas called out to him, but the driver didn't respond, didn't even blink. He simply stood there, trapped in a moment that had stretched far beyond its natural duration. "How long has he been here?" Thomas asked, already dreading the answer. "Time works differently here," the inspector repeated. "He arrived in 1987. He'll finish his inspection, eventually, perhaps another 30 or 40 years. These things take time. The regulations must be followed precisely." Thomas ran. He sprinted to his truck, climbing into the cab and turning the key in the ignition. The engine turned over but wouldn't start, grinding uselessly. He tried again and again, but the truck remained dead. Through his windshield, Thomas could see the inspector approaching slowly, moving with that same unnatural fluidity. The radio crackled to life without Thomas touching controls. Multiple voices spoke in overlapping patterns, all saying the same thing: complete the inspection, document the cargo, follow the regulations. You can't leave until the process is finished. Thomas grabbed his cell phone, but it showed no signal. He tried his CB radio, the same overlapping voices, the same impossible message. The inspector reached the driver's side door and looked up at Thomas through the window with those two wide, pale gray eyes. "You have two choices," the inspector said, his voice somehow audible despite the closed door and windows. "Complete the inspection, which will take approximately 63 years at the standard processing rate. Or you can join the station staff. We always need additional inspectors. The work is eternal, but you won't experience the time passing the same way. You'll become part of the station, part of the process. The choice is yours." Thomas stared at the inspector, his mind rejecting the impossible scenario while his instinct screamed that every word was absolutely true. He thought about his family, his wife in Houston, his two children, his grandson who'd been born 3 months ago. He thought about the driver from 1987, still standing frozen beside his truck, trapped in an eternal inspection process that might not end for decades. "I'll help with the inspection," Thomas heard himself say. "I'll document the cargo. Just let me leave when it's finished." The inspector's face twisted into something that might have been a smile if human facial muscles worked that way. "Of course, everyone who helps with the inspection is eventually allowed to leave. That's the regulation. Follow me." Thomas climbed down from his cab, knowing he was making a terrible mistake, but unable to see any alternative. The inspector led him back to the trailer and began pulling out suitcases, stacking them on the pavement. Each one needed to be opened. Each item cataloged on forms using carbon paper and a manual typewriter that sat on a desk in the scale house. The process was excruciatingly slow. Thomas documented contents. Serial numbers were available, personal information from documents found in the luggage. The inspector checked each form for accuracy, frequently requiring corrections and resubmissions. Hours passed, or what felt like hours. Thomas's watch had stopped at 3:15 a.m., frozen at the moment he'd first entered the way station. As Thomas worked, more trucks arrived at the station, their drivers following the same procedure he had. Most chose to attempt the inspection. A few, after hearing the inspector's explanation, chose to join the staff instead, their appearances subtly changing as they transformed into beings with the same wrong proportions and pale gray eyes. Those who joined the staff stopped aging, stopped changing, became permanent fixtures of the facility. Thomas worked for what felt like days, documenting dozens of suitcases. His body grew tired, but the inspector never allowed breaks. The regulations don't permit rest periods during inspection, the inspector explained. You must complete the process without interruption. On the 47th suitcase, Thomas found something that made his blood run cold. His own wallet, containing his current driver's license, photos of his family, and credit cards. But the license showed an issue date of 2043, 22 years in the future. Along with his wallet, the suitcase contained a death certificate for Thomas Brennan, dated August 15, 2043. Cause of death listed as vehicle accident, Interstate 10, Louisiana. "What is this?" Thomas whispered, holding up the documents. "Your belongings," the inspector said simply. "From when you die, they've been waiting here for processing. Everything arrives eventually. Past, present, future. It all comes through the station. Time works differently here. We process cargo from all temporal coordinates." Thomas looked around the way station with new understanding. This place existed outside normal time, collecting items from deaths that had already happened and deaths that would happen years or decades in the future. The station was eternal, processing an endless stream of cargo from every moment that had ever existed or would ever exist on this stretch of highway. "I need to leave," Thomas said, standing up from the typewriter. "This is impossible. None of this is real." "You can't leave until the inspection is complete," the inspector said, his voice finally showing a hint of emotion, satisfaction, or perhaps anticipation. "You've documented 47 cases. There are 236 remaining. At your current processing rate, you'll finish in approximately 3 weeks. Or you can join the staff and end your subjective experience of time passing. Many choose that option." Thomas looked at his own death certificate again, reading the date with growing horror. August 15th, 2043. That was 22 years away, or it would have been if Thomas were still living in normal time. But in this place, past and future existed simultaneously. His death had already happened. Perspective. Even though from Thomas's perspective it wouldn't occur for 2 more decades. "No," Thomas said firmly. "I'm leaving. You can't keep me here." He walked away from the inspection area, heading toward the way station exit. The inspector followed, moving with that impossible speed to block his path again. But this time, Thomas didn't stop. He walked straight toward the inspector, and as he did, something shifted. The inspector's floor became translucent, less solid, as though Thomas's determination to leave was disrupting the reality of the station itself. Thomas continued walking, and the way station began to fade. The yellow lights dimmed. The brick-scale house became transparent. The parked trucks and their frozen drivers vanished like smoke. Within seconds, Thomas found himself standing on the shoulder of Interstate 10, his truck parked behind him with its engine running normally. No way station anywhere in sight. He climbed into his cab and checked his watch. 3:22 a.m. 7 minutes had passed since he'd first seen the way station that shouldn't exist. He checked his trailer, sealed undisturbed, containing only his legitimate cargo. No suitcases, no boxes, no evidence of anything unusual. Thomas completed his delivery to Atlanta without further incident. But he never forgot the way station outside of time. He researched the stretch of highway where he'd encountered it and found records of dozens of fatal accidents in that area over the past 70 years. And he found something else. Reports from other truck drivers describing encounters with an unexpected way station that appeared and disappeared, trapping some drivers for hours or days before releasing them, confused and traumatized. Thomas drove commercially for another 18 years after that night, always taking routes that avoided that particular stretch of Interstate 10 in Louisiana. He retired in 2039, for years before the death date listed on the certificate he'd found in that suitcase. August 15th, 2043 arrived, and Thomas stayed home, refusing to drive anywhere, determined to outlive the prophecy the station had shown him. But prophecies have a way of fulfilling themselves. On August 15th, 2043, Thomas's home was hit by a car driven by a drunk driver who lost control on the street outside. The vehicle crashed through Thomas's living room wall, killing him instantly. The police report listed the cause of death as vehicle accident, and Thomas's personal belongings, including his wallet, were collected and stored pending notification of next of kin. Those belongings disappeared from police custody 3 days later, vanishing without explanation. And on Interstate 10 in Louisiana, in a way station that exists outside normal time, an inspector with pale gray eyes and wrong proportions adds another suitcase to the endless waiting for processing, knowing that eventually every truck driver will arrive at the station and every piece of cargo will be documented, because time works differently there and the regulations must be followed always and forever in a place where past and future exist simultaneously and no one ever truly leaves. Story 6. The Echo Tunnel. Gregory Peterson had been driving routes through the Appalachian Mountains for 12 years, specializing in deliveries that required navigating challenging terrain and narrow mountain highways. His International LT Series truck was equipped with enhanced braking systems and transmission gearing optimized for steep grades, making him one of the few drivers his company trusted with the most difficult mountain routes. On September 16th, 2019, Gregory was hauling a load of construction materials from Charleston, West Virginia to Knoxville, Tennessee along Route 119 to the mountains. The route included several tunnels, but Gregory had driven through all of them multiple times without incident. The longest tunnel on his route was the Elkhorn Mountain Tunnel, a 2-mile passage through solid rock that had been blasted to the mountain in the 1960s. Gregory entered the tunnel at 1:34 a.m., his headlights cutting through the darkness ahead, the walls narrowing around his truck as the mountain swallowed him. The tunnel's lighting was minimal. Sodium vapor lamps spaced every 100 feet, creating pools of yellow-orange light separated by stretches of darkness. Gregory had driven through this tunnel at least 50 times before, and he knew it took approximately 3 minutes to traverse at the posted speed limit of 45 miles per hour. He maintained his speed, watching the reflective markers along the tunnel walls pass in a steady rhythm. At the 2-minute mark, Gregory should have been able to see the tunnel exit ahead, a semicircle of darkness lighter than the tunnel interior, marking the return to open night air. But the tunnel continued, stretching forward without any sign of ending. Gregory checked his odometer and was disturbed to see he'd already traveled 4 miles inside the tunnel, twice its actual length. He maintained his speed, assuming his odometer was malfunctioning. But as another minute passed with no exit in sight, genuine concern began to build in his chest. The tunnel should have ended. He should have emerged on the other side. Instead, the passage continued endlessly forward, the same reflective markers, the same yellow lights, the same curved walls repeating without variation. Gregory slowed his truck and activated his CB radio. Breaker 19, this is Mountain Runner in the Elkhorn Tunnel. Is anyone receiving this? I need confirmation of tunnel status. Only static answered. He tried again, switching channels, but every frequency carried the same empty static, though no other radios existed in the world. 5 minutes into the tunnel, well past when he should have exited, Gregory noticed something disturbing. His rear view mirror showed the tunnel continuing behind him, but with one crucial difference. His own truck was visible in the distance, following him. He could see his distinctive truck and trailer, his company logos clearly visible in the mirror, driving approximately a quarter mile behind his current position. Gregory's foot eased off the accelerator, slowing his truck, watching the mirror. The following truck slowed at exactly the same rate, maintaining the same distance. Gregory stopped completely, setting his air brake, and the following truck stopped as well, its brake lights illuminating his mirror at the exact moment his own brakes engaged. He sat in the stopped truck, staring at his mirrors, trying to rationalize what he was seeing. It was impossible for his truck to be both here and behind him, yet the reflection was perfect. Every detail of his truck visible, from the custom mud flaps to the small dent in the front bumper. Gregory flashed his headlights, and the truck behind him flashed its lights at exactly the same moment, the timing too perfect to be coincidence. Gregory released his brake and accelerated slowly forward. The truck behind him accelerated at the same rate. He increased his speed to 50 miles per hour. The following truck matched his speed precisely. Gregory slammed on his brakes, and the following truck's brake lights illuminated simultaneously with his own. The tunnel had somehow created a perfect echo of his truck, or possibly, and this thought made Gregory's skin crawl. The truck behind him was the original, and Gregory was the echo. He climbed down from his cab, leaving the engine running, and walked to the back of his trailer. His footsteps echoed strangely in the tunnel, each step producing a delayed sound that came from further down the passage behind him. Gregory turned to look back the way he'd come and saw a figure standing in the tunnel approximately 50 yards away, silhouetted against one of the yellow lights. The figure was wearing trucker's clothing identical to Gregory's. The same jacket, the same boots, the same company logo cap. As Gregory watched, the figure began walking toward him, and Gregory realized with horror that the figure's movements perfectly mirrored his own with a several-second delay. When Gregory raised his hand, the figure raised its hand. When Gregory took a step backward, the figure took a step backward. Gregory turned and ran back to his truck, climbing into the cab and locking the door behind him. He shifted into gear and accelerated hard, his diesel engine roaring as he pushed his speed to 60 miles per hour, dangerously fast for a tunnel with this curvature. In his mirror, he could see the other truck accelerating as well, and the figure he'd seen was now standing behind his truck, growing small in the distance but still perfectly mimicking his posture. The tunnel continued without end. Gregory's odometer showed he'd now traveled 12 miles inside what should have been a 2-mile passage. His fuel gauge was dropping rapidly. The hard acceleration was consuming diesel at an alarming rate. If the tunnel didn't end soon, he would run out of fuel inside this impossible passage and be stranded here with his echo or whatever that following truck represented. At 15 miles into the tunnel, Gregory noticed new details that hadn't been present before. The walls were no longer smooth concrete. They'd become rough stone, as though the tunnel construction had never been completed. The yellow lights were now flickering, their brightness varying randomly, creating a strobe effect that made the tunnel walls seem to pulse and breathe. And there were marks on the walls, scratches, symbols, words carved into the stone by previous travelers who'd been trapped here. Gregory slowed his truck to read one of the carved messages. There is NO exit, Richard M., 1973 inch. Further along, another message. The tunnel loops forever, Sarah K., 1989 inch. Dozens of names and dates cover the walls, spanning decades, all of them testaments to other drivers who become trapped in the tunnel that never ended. Gregory's phone showed no signal, as expected in the tunnel, but when he checked the screen, he found a text message waiting despite the lack of connectivity. The message had no sender information, just 3 words: turn around now. Gregory's first instinct was to ignore the message. Turning around in a tunnel this narrow would be dangerous, possibly impossible with a 53-foot trailer. But as he considered his options, another message appeared. The exit is behind you. The tunnel only goes forward. You must go back. In his mirror, Gregory could see the Echo truck still following, its headlights bright in the darkness. If he reversed, he would drive straight toward it. But the alternative was to continue forward in a tunnel that apparently had no end, burning fuel until he was stranded here with all the other drivers whose names were carved into the walls. Gregory shifted into reverse and began backing up slowly, using his mirrors to guide his trailer. The tunnel curved gradually, making the maneuver even more difficult, but Gregory had years of experience backing trailers through tight spaces. He moved steadily backward, his reverse lights illuminating the tunnel behind him. As he reversed, Gregory watched his forward windshield, expecting to see the Echo truck approaching. Instead, the tunnel ahead began to change. The rough stone walls transformed back into smooth concrete. The flickering lights stabilized. The carved messages vanished, never existed. Gregory was reversing to the tunnel's real configuration, undoing whatever temporal or spatial distortion had trapped him in the forward direction. after backing up for approximately 2 miles. Tracking the distance carefully on his odometer, Gregory saw something impossible. Ahead through his windshield, in the direction he'd originally been traveling, was a tunnel entrance he'd driven through 30 minutes earlier. The tunnel had looped completely, creating a circular passage, and by reversing his direction, he'd broken the loop. Gregory continued backing up until his trailer emerged from the tunnel into the night air. He executed a careful 3-point turn on the mountain highway, repositioning his truck to face away from the tunnel, then stopped to catch his breath and process what had happened. His hands shook on the steering wheel, and his shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cool mountain night. He checked his trailer, sealed and undamaged, his cargo intact. He checked his fuel level. He'd burned nearly a quarter tank during his time in the tunnel. He checked his clock. 47 minutes had passed since he'd entered the tunnel, though his subjective experience suggested at least 2 hours. Time had compressed or expanded inside the passage, operating under different rules in the normal world. Gregory couldn't bring himself to drive back through the tunnel. Instead, he took an alternate route that added 3 hours to his journey, winding down the mountain on narrow switchback roads until he reached a different highway that bypassed the Elkhorn Mountain Tunnel entirely. He completed his delivery to Knoxville 12 hours late, citing mechanical problems that had required repairs. He never drove through that tunnel again, always taking a longer alternate route, even though it added significant time to his deliveries. But Gregory's curiosity eventually overcame his fear, and 6 months after his experience, he visited the tunnel during daylight hours as a civilian, driving through in his personal vehicle to see if the phenomenon persisted. The tunnel was completely normal, a straight 2-mile passage through the mountain, well-lit and properly maintained, with clear sight lines to the exit from any point inside. No rough stone walls, no carved messages, no sign of anything unusual. Gregory drove through it 3 times, timing each passage. Each trip took exactly 3 minutes at the posted speed limit. But on his 4th passage, at exactly the midpoint of the tunnel, Gregory's car radio suddenly erupted with voices, hundreds of them overlapping, all saying the same thing: "Turn around, turn around, turn around." The message repeated until Gregory exited the tunnel, then stopped abruptly as he emerged into daylight. Gregory researched the tunnel's history and found disturbing facts. During the original construction in 1963, 17 workers had been killed in a collapse. A section of the tunnel ceiling gave way. The accident had occurred almost exactly at the tunnel's midpoint, the same location where Gregory's radio had erupted with warnings. The bodies had been recovered, but some of the personal effects and equipment had been left buried, entombed forever in the rock above the tunnel. Additionally, Gregory found accident reports documenting unusual incidents in the tunnel over the years. Several trucks had become stuck inexplicably, their drivers claiming the tunnel had changed shape or length. 2 drivers had abandoned their vehicles inside the tunnel, fleeing on foot and later being found on the highway in states of extreme psychological distress, unable to coherently explain what had frightened them. Both men refused to ever drive commercially again. Gregory created a detailed map marking all the tunnels along his regular routes, researching construction history of each one. He discovered that several tunnels in the Appalachian region had similar histories: construction accidents, worker deaths, strange phenomena reported by drivers. He began sharing this information with other truckers through CB radio conversations and online forums, warning them about specific tunnels and providing alternate routes. Some drivers thanked him for the information. Others dismissed him as paranoid or superstitious. But a surprising number responded with their own stories. Tunnels that seemed longer than they should be, echo phenomena, time distortions, feelings of being followed by copies of their own vehicles. The experiences were consistent enough to suggest a genuine pattern rather than isolated hallucinations. Gregory drove commercially for another 8 years, always avoiding the Elkhorn Mountain Tunnel, always taking a longer alternate route even though it cost him time and money. He retired in 2027 and moved to Florida, far from any mountains or tunnels. But he still has nightmares about driving endlessly through darkness, watching his odometer climb while the exit never appears, seeing his own truck following him in the mirror with increasing closeness. And sometimes, when Gregory drives through any tunnel, highway underpasses, parking garages, even covered bridges. His radio was suddenly filled with static and overlapping voices, all of them saying the same thing: turn around, turn around, turn around. The echo tunnel never truly released him. Part of him is still trapped in that impossible passage, still backing up to the darkness, still trying to escape from the forward direction that leads nowhere except into an endless loop where time and space fold back on themselves, and drivers become permanent residents of the eternal present, forever approaching an exit that retreats at exactly the same speed they advance. Story 7. The Replacement. Victor Ramirez had been driving for Interstate Logistics for 8 years, handling cargo deliveries across the western United States. His Volvo VNL 760 was his second home, equipped with all the creature comforts that made long-haul driving bearable: satellite radio, mini fridge, premium sleeping berth. On April 4, 2020, Victor departed from Sacramento, California, with a load of consumer electronics destined for distribution centers in Nevada. A routine overnight run he completed at least once per week for the past 3 years. The journey began normally. Victor drove through the Central Valley as the sun set, transitioning from daylight to darkness as he approached the Sierra Nevada foothills. His GPS showed him on schedule, with an estimated arrival time of 4:30 a.m. Traffic was light, and weather conditions were perfect. Clear skies and no wind. Victor felt relaxed and confident, listening to a podcast about true crime while watching the white lines of the highway disappear beneath his wheels. At 9:47 p.m., Victor stopped at a truck stop near Truckee to refuel and use the restroom. He parked his truck, locked the cab, and walked into the brightly lit convenience store. The entire stop took approximately 15 minutes. When Victor returned to his truck, he immediately noticed something was wrong. The truck looked identical to his Volvo. Same model, same color, same company logos. But small details were different. The mud flaps bore a different brand than the ones he'd purchased 3 months ago. The custom air horn button he'd installed on the steering wheel was missing. The air freshener hanging from his mirror was a different scent than what he'd bought. Victor checked his key fob, confirming he was at the correct truck. His remote unlocked the door. His key fit the ignition. But the differences continued to accumulate as he inspected the cab interior. The mileage on the odometer was wrong. It showed 347,000 miles, while Victor's truck had just rolled over 420,000 miles the previous week. The sleeping berth curtains were blue instead of the gray ones he'd installed. Even his logbook showed different entries, with handwriting that resembled his own but wasn't quite identical. Victor's first assumption was that another driver had an extremely similar truck parked next to his, and he confused the two vehicles. He walked around the parking lot, looking for his actual truck, but found nothing matching his specific configuration. Every other truck in the lot was clearly different colors, different companies, different models entirely. He returned to the Volvo that his key had unlocked and sat in the driver's seat, trying to rationalize the situation. Perhaps his company had swapped trucks without informing him, though that made no sense mid-delivery. Perhaps he was more exhausted than he'd realized, and his memory of his truck's details was simply wrong. Victor pulled and scrolled through photos, finding several pictures of his truck's interior taken just days ago. The differences were unmistakable. This was not the same truck. Despite responding to his key, Victor called his dispatcher, explaining the situation as calmly as he could manage. The dispatcher checked the GPS tracking on Victor's truck and confirmed that according to the system, Victor was exactly where he should be, in the correct truck, right on schedule. Everything shows normal from here. Victor, your truck, your cargo, your route. Are you feeling okay? Do you need to take a rest break? I'm telling you, something's wrong, Victor insisted. This isn't my truck. Details are different. Is your cargo secure? Does the seal number match your manifest? Victor climbed down and walked the back of his trailer, checking the security seal. The number matched his paperwork exactly. He opened the trailer doors and inspected the cargo. Pallets of electronics, properly secured and documented, matching his manifest perfectly. Everything about the cargo was correct. Only the truck itself was wrong. Cargo's fine, Victor admitted, but I'm telling you this truck is different. Victor, you've been driving for 10 hours. Sometimes fatigue creates false memories. Why don't you grab some sleep and see if things look clearer after rest? If you still feel something's wrong in the morning, we'll sort it out then." Victor ended the call, knowing he wasn't imagining the differences but unable to prove his case. He sat in the truck stop parking lot for another hour, cataloging every detail that seemed wrong. The list grew to over 30 items. Small differences in equipment, configuration, were patterns. This truck had lived a different life than his own, despite being identical in all major aspects. Finally, with no other rational option, Victor decided to complete his delivery. He would document everything and insist on a thorough inspection once he reached Nevada. He pulled back on the highway, the unfamiliar truck handling slightly differently than he remembered. The steering response was quicker, the brakes engaged more aggressively, the transmission shifted at different RPMs. At 11:34 p.m., Victor's cell phone rang. The caller ID showed his own number. Victor stared at the screen in confusion. How could he be receiving a call from himself? He answered, and the voice on the other end made his blood run cold. It was his own voice, identical in every nuance, speaking with his accent and speech patterns. "Who is this?" Victor demanded. "I'm you," the voice said simply. "The real you. You're in my truck. I'm in yours. We've been swapped." "That's impossible," Victor whispered, though he'd already suspected something similar. "Check," the other Victor said. "Look at your license." With trembling hands, Victor pulled out his wallet and examined his driver's license. The photo showed his face, but something about it was subtly wrong. The angle of his smile, the way his hair lay, details that were almost correct, but not quite. The license number was different from what he remembered by a single digit. Even his signature on the back of the license looked slightly off. "What's happening?" Victor asked. "I don't know," the other Victor replied. "I stopped at a truck stop in Truckee, and when I came back, I was in a truck that wasn't quite mine. Everything was almost right, but wrong in small ways. Then I realized we swapped. You're living my life now, and I'm living yours. We're in parallel timelines that somehow intersected at that truck stop." Victor's mind reeled with the implications. "How we swap back?" "I don't think we can," the other Victor said. "I've been researching this. There are stories online about people who experience similar phenomena, brief moments where reality shifts and they find themselves in lives that are almost identical to their original lives, but different in small ways. Most people never notice because the differences are too subtle. But we notice because we're both detail-oriented and we know our trucks too well." "This is insane," Victor said. "I don't believe in parallel timelines or reality shifts." "Look at the next exit sign," the other Victor instructed. "Tell me what it says." Victor watched the highway ahead, and an exit sign appeared in his headlights. "Exit 194, Donner Lake, 2 miles. "In my reality, that exit is number 193, the other Victor said. "Highway exits, mile markers, even town names, they're slightly different between our timelines. Most people would never notice, but we're noticing because we're looking for differences. The timelines are nearly identical, but they're not the same." Over the next 2 hours, as Victor drove the night, he and his alternate self compared notes, documenting hundreds of small differences between their realities. In Victor's original timeline, his company had been called Interstate Logistics since its founding. In this timeline, it had been briefly named Interstate Transport before rebrand Interstate Logistics in 2008. Victor had a sister named Maria. The other Victor had a sister named Marie. The differences were subtle but consistent. Names varied by a letter, dates shifted by days or months. Events occurred in slightly different sequences. "Have you called my family?" Victor asked. "My wife, does she know?" "I called her," the other Victor admitted. "She didn't notice anything wrong. To her, I am you. I have all your memories, all your life together. The timelines are so similar that I can function as you without raising suspicion, and you can function as me. We're interchangeable." "But we're not the same person," Victor protested. "Aren't we? We made all the same choices. We have all the same experiences. We're identical except for the reality we happen to inhabit. In every meaningful way, we are the same person. The only difference is the timeline we're experiencing. Victor completed his delivery to Nevada as scheduled, and the other Victor completed his delivery in the parallel timeline. They compared notes daily through phone calls, always careful to use untraceable prepaid phones to avoid anyone discovering their bizarre situation. As weeks passed, Victor adjusted to the small differences in his new reality. His wife, who was identical to the wife he remembered except for minor preference changes, never suspected anything was wrong. His children were the same ages with the same personalities, but with slightly different middle names. His friends and colleagues all existed with the same relationships, but fractionally altered histories. The other Victor reported similar experiences. They were living each other's lives. And because the lives were so similar, the swap was functionally invisible to everyone except themselves. They debated attempting to return to their original timelines, but neither could figure out how. The truck stop where the swap occurred showed no unusual properties when they returned separately to investigate. Whatever confluence of circumstances had caused a timeline intersection apparently couldn't be replicated. As months turned into a year, Victor found himself questioning whether it even mattered. He was living a life virtually identical to his original one, surrounded by people who were effectively the same as the people he'd known before. Was the other Victor, living his original life in the original timeline, actually him in any meaningful sense? Or were they both equally valid versions of the same person, now living in swap realities? Victor continued driving trucks, completing the same routes, living in the same house, maintaining the same relationships. But small details constantly reminded him that this wasn't quite his reality. A favorite restaurant had a slightly different menu. A movie he remembered had a different ending. A historical event he'd learned about in school had occurred on a different date. The differences were subtle enough that he could have convinced himself he'd always misremembered, except that he had the other Victor to compare notes with, confirming that both timelines were real and distinct. The psychological weight of living in an almost correct reality began to affect Victor's mental health. He found himself questioning every memory, wondering whether his experiences belonged to this timeline or his original one. The other Victor reported similar struggles. They were both functionally the same person, living the same lives, yet eternally aware that they were in realities that didn't quite fit them, like wearing shoes that were one size too small, functional but never quite comfortable. On the 1-year anniversary of the swap, Victor received a final call from the other Victor. "I'm going to stop calling," the other Victor said. "This isn't healthy for either of us. We need to accept our new realities and stop comparing them to what we remember. Let's both commit to living our current lives fully, without the constant reminder that we're in swap timelines." Victor agreed, and they ended the call with a promise to delete each other's contact information and never communicate again. Victor kept that promise for 3 weeks. Then, unable to resist, he tried calling the number one more time. It was disconnected, no longer in service. Either the other Victor had truly committed to moving forward, or something had happened to prevent further contact. Victor continued driving trucks for another 2 years, but the weight of living in an almost correct reality never fully lifted. In 2023, he quit driving and took a warehouse management position that kept him off the highways. He couldn't escape the subtle wrongness of his reality, but he could at least avoid the truck stops where reality had fractured, the highways where timelines intersected. Sometimes Victor stands in front of the mirror, studying his face, wondering if he's looking at his original face or a version that's subtly different from the one he was born with. Sometimes he calls his wife by the wrong name, not the name of any other woman, but simply a single-letter variation of her name that feels more correct to him than the version used in this timeline. She corrects him gently, assuming it's a simple mistake, never suspecting that her husband is from a parallel reality where her name was spelled differently. And sometimes, late at night, Victor's phone rings from his own number, despite having changed his phone and number 3 times since the original swap. He never answers these calls, terrified of what the voice on the other end might say, whether it might be the other Victor trying to warn him of something, or perhaps a third Victor from yet another timeline, informing him that the intersections are multiplying, that more versions of himself are being swapped into increasingly divergent realities. Victor lives now with the knowledge that reality is thinner than people assume, that the barrier between parallel timelines is permeable under certain unknown conditions, and that somewhere in an infinite array of similar realities, countless versions of himself are living lives that are almost identical to his own, but wrong in ways both subtle and profound. And the most terrifying aspect isn't that he was swapped into a different timeline. It's that he has no way to know if this is his first swap or his 100th, whether the reality he remembers as original was itself already a replacement, and whether the version of Victor Ramirez who was born in the timeline still exists somewhere, confused and displaced, living in a world that's almost correct but never quite right. Story 8. The Black Convoy. Elizabeth Crawford had been driving specialized medical transport for 11 years, hauling temperature-controlled pharmaceuticals and medical supplies across the northeastern United States. Her Freightliner Cascadia was equipped with advanced refrigeration systems and real-time monitoring equipment that tracked every aspect of her cargo's condition. On December 2nd, 2021, Elizabeth was transporting a shipment of vaccines from Boston, Massachusetts to medical facilities in upstate New York, traveling along Interstate 90 through a winter storm that had reduced visibility and closed several alternate routes. At 2:17 a.m., Elizabeth was driving through a particularly isolated stretch of highway in central Massachusetts when she noticed headlights in her rear-view mirror. Another truck approaching from behind at a speed much faster than conditions warranted. The storm had intensified over the past hour, with heavy snow reducing visibility to less than 100 feet. Elizabeth had slowed to 40 miles per hour for safety, but the approaching truck had to be traveling at least 65. As the truck drew closer, Elizabeth could make out its shape through the snow. Another semi, completely black, with no company markings visible. The truck pulled into the passing lane and accelerated alongside Elizabeth's truck, matching her speed. Elizabeth glanced over and saw the other driver, or rather, saw nothing. The cab appeared to be completely dark, with no visible driver, no lights on the dashboard, nothing to indicate anyone was controlling the vehicle. Elizabeth accelerated slightly, trying to let the black truck pass, but it matched her speed and increased precisely. She slowed down and it slowed with her. The truck maintained its position in the passing lane, keeping pace with her exactly, creating an unsettling synchronization that felt deliberate and threatening. Elizabeth grabbed her CB radio. Breaker 19. This is Med transport to the driver of the black Freightliner in the passing lane. You need to either pass or fall back. You're my blind spot. No response. Only static filled the channel. Elizabeth tried again on different frequencies, but no one answered. The black truck continued its parallel course for another 5 miles, never pulling ahead, never falling behind. Then, without warning, a second black truck appeared in Elizabeth's mirror, approaching rapidly from behind. This truck also bore no markings, no lights except for its headlights and running lights, appearing as a dark shape moving through the storm. It pulled up directly behind Elizabeth's trailer, following at a distance of less than 20 feet, dangerously close to the road conditions. Felt her heart rate increase as the situation became more threatening. 2 trucks were now boxing her in, one alongside, one directly behind. She tried accelerating to break free of the formation, pushing her speed to 55 miles per hour despite the storm. The trucks matched her speed perfectly, maintaining their positions with mechanical precision. A third black truck appeared in the distance ahead, traveling in the opposite direction in the westbound lanes. As it approached, Elizabeth saw it cross the median without slowing, plowing to the snow-covered grass divider and entering the eastbound lanes directly in front of her. The truck positioned itself approximately a quarter mile ahead, traveling at the same speed as Elizabeth, creating a convoy formation, one ahead, one alongside, one behind. Elizabeth grabbed her phone and dialed 911, her voice shaking as she reported the situation to the dispatcher. 3 trucks are surrounding me on Interstate 90. They're blocking me in. I think this is some kind of coordinated hijacking attempt. My cargo is medical supplies, vaccines. Please send police. The dispatcher assured her that state police were being notified, but Elizabeth knew she was in an isolated area where response times would be measured in tens of minutes, not seconds. She was alone with these 3 black trucks that moved with eerie coordination, maintaining their formation with precision that suggested either sophisticated communication or something far stranger. The truck alongside Elizabeth began to drift closer, its trailer edging into her lane. Elizabeth steered right, toward the shoulder, trying to maintain distance, but the black truck followed, slowly pushing her off the road. Elizabeth hit her air horn repeatedly, the blast echoing through the storm, but the black truck didn't react. It continued its steady lateral drift, forcing Elizabeth's truck toward the shoulder and the guardrail beyond. Just before Elizabeth's truck would have been forced off the road, the black truck alongside her suddenly accelerated, pulling ahead and taking position with the other truck in front. Now Elizabeth had one truck on each side ahead of her and one directly behind, forming a triangle formation with her truck at the center. The trucks matched speed with her perfectly as she varied her throttle, maintaining their formation regardless of how she tried to break free. Elizabeth's cargo monitoring system suddenly erupted with alerts. The temperature in her refrigerated trailer was rising rapidly, from a required 2 degrees Celsius to 4 degrees, then 6 degrees, increasing by 2 degrees every few seconds. Elizabeth checked her refrigeration controls and found her system was running at maximum capacity, yet the temperature continued to climb. Something was generating heat inside her trailer, overwhelming her cooling system. The temperature reached 15 degrees Celsius, well above the her vaccine cargo. At this temperature, the vaccines would begin to degrade within minutes, potentially rendering millions of dollars worth of medicine useless. Elizabeth tried to slow down, planning to pull over and investigate, but the truck behind her moved forward, closing the distance to less than 10 feet. If Elizabeth braked, the black truck would collide with her trailer. Her phone rang, an unknown number. Elizabeth answered, and a voice spoke, genderless, artificial, like a text-to-speech system reading from a script. Your cargo does not belong in this timeline. You are transporting materials that create temporal paradoxes. We are correcting the inconsistency. What are you talking about? Elizabeth demanded. I'm hauling vaccines, medical supplies. There's nothing unusual about them. The vaccines in your cargo were developed using research that should not exist in this timeline, the artificial voice explained. A scientist who should have died in 2019 survived and continued her work. The vaccines in your trailer are the product of that continued research. They represent a timeline branch that must be pruned. We are removing the inconsistency. Elizabeth's mind raced. The voice was claiming that her cargo, standard vaccines manufactured by major pharmaceutical companies, somehow represented a timeline error. You're insane. These are legitimate medical supplies. People need these vaccines. The people who need these vaccines exist in a timeline that has already been corrected. You are attempting to deliver materials from a pruned branch into the main timeline. This creates paradoxes. We are preventing the paradox by destroying the inconsistent materials. The temperature in Elizabeth's trailer reached 25 degrees Celsius. The monitoring system showed red alerts across all displays. Every dose of vaccine in the trailer was now compromised, the delicate biological materials denaturing in the heat. Elizabeth watched her cargo being systematically destroyed by forces she couldn't understand or combat. Why are you doing this? Elizabeth screamed into the phone. If what you're saying is true, why not just steal the cargo? Why destroy it? The materials cannot be allowed to exist in any timeline. Destruction is the only option that prevents paradox propagation. You will deliver empty refrigeration units to your destination. The loss will be attributed to equipment failure. A new shipment from timeline-consistent sources will be manufactured. The correction will be complete. The phone went dead. The temperature in Elizabeth's trailer stabilized at 27 degrees Celsius, well above the point where her cargo was irreversibly damaged. The black trucks maintained their formation for another 15 miles, then simultaneously accelerated and dispersed. The truck ahead and the truck alongside pulled away at high speed, disappearing into the storm. The truck behind dropped back and exited at the next off-ramp. Within seconds, Elizabeth was alone on the highway again, as though the convoy had never existed. Elizabeth pulled into the next rest area and inspected her trailer, finding no signs of forced entry or tampering. The refrigeration system was functioning correctly. The temperature had returned to 2 degrees Celsius, exactly as programmed, but the damage was done. Her monitoring log showed a 20-minute period of elevated temperatures that had destroyed her entire cargo. Hundreds of thousands of vaccine doses, representing millions of dollars in value, had been rendered worthless. State police arrived 40 minutes after Elizabeth's original 911 call, but by then the black trucks were long gone. Elizabeth provided descriptions, but she had no license plate numbers, no company names, no identifying information except 3 black trucks with no markings. The police treated it as a potential hijacking attempt that had been abandoned, though they couldn't explain why anyone would want to destroy medical cargo rather than steal it. Elizabeth completed her delivery to upstate New York, arriving with a trailer full of destroyed vaccines. The receiving facility documented the temperature logs and filed insurance claims for the cargo loss. Elizabeth provided her statement multiple times. To police, to insurance investigators, to her company's management. Everyone accepted that some kind of equipment malfunction or sabotage had occurred, but no one could definitively explain what happened or why. In the days following the incident, Elizabeth researched the vaccine manufacturer, tried to understand the artificial voice's claim about timeline inconsistencies. She discovered that one of the lead researchers on the vaccine development team, Dr. Sarah Chun, had nearly died in a car accident in 2019, but had survived due to the immediate response of a paramedic who happened to be at the accident scene. Dr. Chun had gone on to make several breakthrough contributions to vaccine development over the following 2 years. Elizabeth found herself drawn into research about timeline theories and parallel universes, trying to rationalize what she'd experienced. She found online communities discussing similar phenomena, mysterious interventions that seemed designed to prevent certain technologies, discoveries, or people from existing. Stories of researchers whose work was destroyed under mysterious circumstances. Patents that disappeared from databases. Inventions that failed despite sound engineering. All potentially attributed to timeline correction, if one believed in such things. Elizabeth continued driving medical transport routes, but she watched for black trucks constantly, her anxiety every time she saw an unmarked vehicle in her mirrors. 3 more times over the following year, she encountered convoys of black trucks that surrounded her vehicle briefly before dispersing without interaction. Each time, nothing happened to her cargo, as though the trucks were simply observing her, monitoring her routes, ensuring she wasn't transporting any more timeline inconsistent materials. Other drivers began reporting similar encounters. Elizabeth connected with a network of truckers who'd experienced black convoy phenomena, unmarked trucks that appeared suddenly, maintained formation briefly, then vanished without explanation. Most reported no damage or interference, just temporary surveillance. But a few reported cargo destruction similar to Elizabeth's experience, always involving specialized or cutting-edge materials, prototype electronics, experimental pharmaceuticals, unique manufactured components. Elizabeth developed a theory that certain materials or technologies trigger some kind of intervention, possibly from entities or systems operating outside normal time, correcting what they perceive as timeline errors. She couldn't prove this theory, couldn't even convince most people to take it seriously, but the pattern of black convoy encounters was too consistent to dismiss as coincidence. On a night in October 2023, Elizabeth was driving through Pennsylvania when her phone rang from an unknown number. She answered, and the same artificial voice she'd heard 2 years earlier spoke. "Elizabeth Crawford, you have been selected for an explanation. Pull into the rest area ahead. Come alone. You will not be harmed." Every instinct screamed at Elizabeth to refuse, to keep driving, to call police. But her need to understand overrode her fear. She pulled into the rest area, a small facility with minimal lighting and no other vehicles. In the far corner of the parking lot sat a black truck, completely unmarked, its engine running. Elizabeth approached on foot, her phone recording everything. The truck's driver door opened and a figure stepped down, humanoid but wrong, like the inspector from Kenneth Walsh's story, proportions slightly off in ways that shouldn't be possible for a human body. The figure wore dark clothing that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "You want to understand the black convoy," the figure said, its voice the same artificial tone from the phone calls. "You have researched timelines, paradoxes, corrections. Most of what you theorize is essentially correct. We monitor cargo moving through this timeline. When inconsistencies are detected, materials that shouldn't exist in this version of reality, we intervene. "Who are you?" Elizabeth asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We are corrections. Not human, not from your timeline originally. We exist outside time, observing the branching paths of possibility, pruning branches that create catastrophic paradoxes. Your timeline is generally stable, but occasionally materials from pruned branches contaminate the main flow. We prevent that contamination from propagating. The vaccines I was carrying, were they really from a different timeline? Yes, Doctor. Sarah Chun should have died in 2019. Her survival created a branch timeline where she continued her research. That branch was pruned, terminated, because it led to catastrophic outcomes 40 years in your future. But materials from that branch occasionally manifest in your timeline before the pruning is complete. We remove those materials to prevent the catastrophic future from reasserting itself. Why are you telling me this? Elizabeth asked. Because you are persistent. You research. You connect with others who experience phenomena. You will eventually share what you learn, creating awareness. Some humans need to know that timelines are monitored and corrected. It helps reduce panic when corrections become more visible. In the coming decades, timeline instability will increase. More prunings will be necessary. More corrections. Humans who understand this process can help others adapt. The figure climbed back into the black truck, and Elizabeth felt compelled to ask one final question. How many timelines have I lived through? Have I been corrected before? The figure paused, its hand on the door handle. You specifically have been corrected 17 times. Each time, a version of you is removed from a pruned branch and integrated into the main timeline. You retain no memory of the transitions, but they affect you. Dreams, déjà vu, a persistent feeling that reality is slightly wrong. You are what we call persistent consciousness. Your awareness continues across multiple timeline versions. That's why you notice things others miss. That's why you were able to remember our interventions when most witnesses forget within hours. The black truck drove away, leaving Elizabeth standing alone in the rest area parking lot, her mind reeling with implications. If she'd been corrected 17 times, how many lives had she lived? How many versions of herself had been erased when timelines were pruned? Was she even the original Elizabeth Crawford, or was she a composite of multiple timeline versions stitched together by forces outside her control? Elizabeth continued driving trucks, but she began documenting everything. Every strange encounter, every unexplained phenomenon, every moment when reality seemed slightly wrong. She shared her information with the network of drivers who'd experienced black convoys, building a database of timeline correction events. Some called her obsessed. Others called her insane. But recognizing in her words the same unsettling truth they'd experienced themselves. The black trucks continue their eternal patrols, maintaining formations, correcting inconsistencies, pruning branches. And Elizabeth Crawford drives through the night, aware now that she exists in a monitored timeline, that the reality she experiences is constantly being adjusted and corrected by entities outside linear time. She is a witness to the scaffolding that holds reality together, the active maintenance required to prevent timeline collapse. And every night when she checks her mirrors, she wonders if the headlights behind her belong to an ordinary truck or to another black convoy, arriving to form another correction, perhaps this time correcting her entirely, removing Elizabeth Crawford from this timeline and replacing her with a version more consistent with the pruned and managed flow of monitored history.